Good morning, everyone who's joining us. We're just going to give it another minute to make sure all the folks that are logging in are getting connected. So just so everyone knows, we are recording this to share with families who aren't able to make it. So if you could mute yourself on your end, and then when there's an opportunity for questions later, you can unmute yourself to talk. And just for the recording, it helps the feedback. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. I think people will join in us as as we get started here in the first few minutes. First, I want to thank everyone so much for coming this morning. We really appreciate it. We are so excited to share the work that we've been doing and the opportunities that we're creating for our middle school students. While all of our middle school teachers have been working on developing this program, I would like to introduce the 4 teachers who are presenting today. We have Evelyn Mockerman and Jenny Wood from our math department, Eli Jones from our social studies department, and Corby Robertson from our English department. So we're going to start with a prepared presentation, and then there'll be plenty of time after for questions. On this first screen, this is kind of what we're calling the program. We're calling it Impact. We spent a lot of time talking about what we want to call the new middle school experience, and we finally did land on Impact. Traditionally, middle school education has been something that just kind of happens. It's not elementary and it's not high school, but we really wanted to create something that's powerful in our students' lives, but more importantly, shows how they are powerful in the world, how they have an impact on the world. So here we have a couple graphics that capture these ideas. The first are some key words that we kept coming back to as we crafted this middle school experience: investigation, metacognition, passion, actualization, curiosity, and togetherness. The words are presented in an arrow because we want students to continue to grow and to rise. The second image is of Newton's cradle, and we'll offer this to students as a way to show how everything is connected to, impacted by everything else. One of the other important elements we kept at the forefront as we were talking about redesigning the middle school experience is our duty as a laboratory school. So on this slide, we have the Indiana Code, we have the duty of a laboratory school, and these are sort of the three obligations that we have to the field of education. Develop, test, and evaluate new methods of instruction and materials, compare new methods with conventional methods in use, and then train teachers in new methods of instruction and materials as is found acceptable.
So as we went into planning what we would like to do with this program, we looked at goals that we wanted to achieve. So one of the goals that we looked at is that we wanted to make sure that students saw themselves as learners and not simply just task doers. So they were actively involved in their education, not just doing something to get it done and turn it in. We also want to make sure that we give students the opportunities to experiment and to fail through their experiments in a safe way that encourages them to continue moving forward and try again. We want to encourage our cross-curricular, cross-disciplinary activities so that students see that we don't just do math in the math classroom. It's involved in other pieces, and there's science involved in math, and there's English involved in math, so that they see how things actually come together and they're not just isolated subjects. And we definitely want to emphasize and practice our social emotional wellness and our community responsibility. Some bonus goals that kind of come out of these are we can de-emphasize grades and instead emphasize the learning to help students really see what's going on with and experience what it is that they're learning, what they're processing, what they're looking at. We want to move away from our structured hour classes so that students don't say, okay, when I leave this classroom, I'm done with English for the day and moving on, because we know that all of those subjects come together. So we want to provide an opportunity for students to see that. And then we want to be able to provide real world scenarios for students to grasp what they are learning as well.
So you may ask yourself, why do this in middle school? One of the things that happens in middle school, and it became really evident to me when I moved back to Indiana to start teaching middle school again, I taught in a school where it was very prescribed. We had a specific plan, and the plan was not working. And so I started doing a lot of research about how to fix what I saw as being ultimately problematic for the students. And so one of the things that happens in middle school is you go from a classroom in elementary school where teachers are very skilled at showing students how the subjects relate with each other, sometimes teaching those subjects alongside each other, into an environment where suddenly they're all torn apart and you have about a bazillion standards. That was an official account, a bazillion. It's not really, it's just several, but there are lots in each subject. And so what happens is students lose track of what they're supposed to be learning, and it's not connected to anything else. And so their learning is actually inhibited by the fact that everything is kind of taken apart. So some of the things in middle school that are really important is helping students develop their identities, helping them sharpen their metacognitive minds, and also helping them channel all the extra energy they have. I'm sure at home you kind of see that extra energy happening. So a lot of the information that we took to underpin this is from a book called Best Schools by Thomas Armstrong, specifically a chapter about middle schools and social, emotional, and metacognitive growth. Also, why middle school? One of the things that happens in middle school that's actually at exactly the wrong time of human development is everything switches to an academic achievement discourse. And what that does is it moves the students from thinking about where they are developmentally, and from teachers thinking about where their students are developmentally, to having that push to prepare them for high school and to sort of, make sure that we're looking at these test scores, looking at these standards, looking at the academic content, when really a good portion of what they need is us to sort of help them with their human development rather than that intellectual growth. Not to sideline the intellectual growth, but it needs to happen alongside that social and emotional piece as well. Also, we don't have a large interpersonal school. The school I was at before had 1,600 middle schoolers in it. It was very large, it was very impersonal, and like I said, it was very prescriptive, and it didn't work. But we're also not really taking advantage of our very small school that we have here in every way that we possibly could. In general, students have like 7 different teachers throughout the day. They're with that particular teacher for 55 minutes and they go to the next one, to the next one. It's very traditional. And one of the things that throughout my research that I've noticed is that in middle school, students are looking for role models, academic, and also behavioral role models. And so we thought with having the students have access to all 12 middle school teachers for a longer, more extended period of time, and in a more in-depth sort of academic environment, that they would then be able to sort of look at those teachers as role models instead of just a person whose room they have to go and sit in for 55 minutes. And so those learning experiences will then sort of take advantage of their energy that they have, and it will determine the types of learning and the outcomes of that in a better way rather than the traditional way.
So continuing with this idea, or this answering this question of why middle school, in addition to looking at it kind of nationally, we wanted to look at it more specifically at Burris. So I think a lot of times at Burris, we see ourselves as immune to some of the struggles that middle school students experience nationwide. But in reviewing student data from a recent survey that we conducted in Burris, we learned that the majority of our middle school students identify stressors from work, testing, meeting expectations, fear of mistakes, all of these things as challenges in their school life. And these are areas that were rated much higher than things we might have expected, such as bullying or friend and family relationships. And additionally, when we asked students to agree or disagree with the statement, students enjoy being in school, the majority of our middle school students indicated that they disagreed with the statement, that students do not enjoy being in school.
So with that information, we started to think about inappropriate versus appropriate practices at the middle school age. And a couple I want to focus on from this chart are the no significant arts program and expressive arts activities for all students. So in a minute, we're going to talk about the extra opportunities students are going to have at the high school level for art while they're in middle school. But I want to also say that if you have a student who is very artistic in fine arts, music, two-dimensional or three-dimensional art, this is going to be great for them because in a new way, they are going to be able to bring their art interest and ability into the projects that they are working on. And I think that's really great. I know when I was in middle school, I was a kid who I wanted to do art for everything. And I think this is going to be a great possibility for students who want to do art for everything to be able to do it as part of everything. So I think that'll be really beneficial for them. The other thing is that we're really kind of focusing on is moving from that teacher-controlled learning environment to having students be involved in decision-making. As students go into middle school, one of the things that they're trying out is they're trying to learn how to be adults and trying to figure out how to make decisions. And if we keep making the decisions for them, even academically, we're sort of stunting their growth in that capacity. So this is going to give students a lot more flexibility in like making decisions with adults there to help guide them and help them think through the decisions rather than making them for them. And last but not least is, excuse me, is we want to focus on facilitating their social and emotional growth. So that's a huge piece of middle school education that I think is going to be facilitated better in this group learning environment. Because when you're working with a group, you have to think socially and emotionally. And the teachers are planning to model that for them, and we're planning to sort of guide them along in that capacity. And that way they'll be able to develop those skills rather than just having like an hour set aside a day where that's the intention. So they'll get that hour where they learn about it, and then they'll get the other 4 hours to sort of practice that. So I think that that's going to be really beneficial as well, and appropriate practice.
So let's look at some of the shifts that will happen from our previous approach and what we're looking for moving on. So the schedule is going to look a little bit different for students. And we've talked about this a little bit, but students are going to have their morning time with various teachers available to them within the middle school to be able to look into different projects. And so it's a little bit, we're not trying to separate out the hours by the core content anymore. We're trying to blend them together. I spoke earlier on de-emphasizing grades and emphasizing that learning piece instead. So that's a little bit of a shift for us as well. With that, we're going to look and have a greater focus on skill acquisition. And we're going to talk about this thing called ZPD in just a little bit here. So more on that coming, but that's how we are going to look at where students can evaluate where they are with their skills. We definitely want to make sure that this is something that is individualized to each student. And the way that we have this planned, we have a really good way to be able to talk with students more often, look at what is going on with their individual learning, and to be able to adjust for them. And then we want to provide students with a holistic worldview.
So you might ask yourself, how might a sample project play out? How might the schedule work? We have devised pods. There will be 3 pods. Each pod has 4 core content area teachers: science, social studies, language arts, and math. So students will be in that group with those 4 teachers. They will also have access to all 12 middle school teachers and all their fine arts teachers throughout that 4-hour block in the morning and throughout the year. So each pod will have 4 teachers and approximately 60 students total, divided amongst the pod facilitators. Oh, that's still me. I'm sorry. I'm trying to negotiate two different devices to see when it's me because I keep forgetting. I'm totally human, as you can see. How might a sample project play out with timelines and evaluation? The timelines will vary and they won't be constrained to normal school constraints. So like usually when a teacher plans, they're like, okay, this quarter I need to finish all these things. The next quarter I need to finish all these things. And so this is going to kind of make it so that the learning is a little more natural and organic and doesn't really sort of cleave to those arbitrary breaks in the school year. Some projects will be longer and more sustained, and others will be shorter and a little bit more kind of surface level maybe. I can envision a student perhaps after this first project getting really excited about a topic in that project and maybe trying to figure out how to work that idea in throughout the school year in their other projects. So for them, that would be kind of like one long sustained project where other people will be like, yep, that was a great project. I don't really want to think about that anymore, and then move on. So it's kind of going to be student focused and driven in that way as well.
All right, so this is where we sort of materialize the de-emphasis on grades and a stronger emphasis on skill development. What you see here is a ZPD chart, or a Zones of Proximal Development chart, based on research from Lev Vygotsky. And in the three regions that we have, the outside region, we have skills and things that the student cannot yet do. The middle circle is things that the students can do, but with assistance, whether that be from a teacher, a partner, or an online video or an instruction module, something, any help from anything. The inside circle is things that the student can do entirely on their own. And each of those boxes or sticky notes, depending on what model we're looking at, represent a different skill in various content areas, the four that we've mentioned, the main ones, but also social and emotional learning skills. And as the students grow, they have an individual chart that represents that growth. So we start with things that they cannot do. We help them as teachers and as partners and facilitators grow to the can do with help, and then eventually they can do those things on their own. Excuse me. And again, each student will have their own individual chart. So this really allows individual progress. And I'll explain more on that with the next slide.
So once students begin to master skills, that they may identify ones that they're good at, but not just that, they may identify things that they love to do. That's what that love corner is for. So once they find a skill that they really, really enjoy doing, we'll ask them to move that skill to the love corner. Now, what's the benefit of that? You may be wondering. Well, there are several possible benefits. One is it could point to possible career paths for them to explore later. It also could give them a frame of reference for other skills to acquire. So for instance, if they really understand cause-effect in a language arts piece, but are struggling with understanding how one thing causes another in a historical or social studies type concept, we can transfer those skills. So it gives us a point of connection. It can also give them things to look into as they're starting some student-driven projects, deciding what they want to work on and explore more. And then simply just to remember things later that they've enjoyed. Sometimes we come to the end of the school year and we might not remember what was at the beginning of the school year that we really liked to do. So it's just kind of a collection of things that they enjoy.
All right, I'm going to ask a weird question, but there's a truck beeping. Can you guys hear that, or am I good? Oh, good. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So here we have an example or sample ZPD. I trial ran this process with middle school social studies and high school world history this past semester. And I learned a lot, the kids learned a lot, and we were able to identify some areas of improvement from what we've done. But the pictures here show growth over time for a sample student. And so we began the semester with all of these different skills on the outside of the circles. Each of those move independently. And instead of the traditional grading structure where the student would complete an assignment or an activity, submit that on Canvas to me, sometimes they wouldn't even hand it to me personally, especially this year. I would grade it in solitude, and then they would get a grade and see that number. There would be no communication, no organic, discussion at all. Instead, we replaced that with conversations. And so the students would demonstrate their ability to do these different historical and social studies skills. We would talk about it together, and it was more of a collaboration on when they could move those skills to those certain areas. So when we say de-emphasize grades, that doesn't mean we're just throwing everything out the window. It becomes more of a constructive partnership or a collaboration with the teachers and the students. And as the student grew, you can see they didn't get everything to the center. They did not master all of the skills, and that's okay. We know where we need to go moving forward with this specific student. Now, the student sitting next to this student, the charts looked completely different. Some students were able to master the majority of the skills extremely, quick. And other students ended up with 15, 20, 25 of the skills moved maybe by the end of the year. And so it really individualizes that progress rather than putting everyone on the same track with the same timeline throughout the school year.
And what's really neat about individualizing this process is that while our ZPD chart might start out the same for each student at the beginning of the year, every single chart by the end of the year is going to look different. And that might be where the sticky notes or the boxes are placed. But on top of that, as facilitators in their learning, we teachers can work to develop even different skills for each student. So there might be a student who can move one of those boxes straight into the middle where they can do it on their own right away, not a big deal. But there might be another student who we see them struggling with that skill, and we can break it down into smaller pieces. So one box might turn into 3, but then that student can see the progress going through those 3 boxes as they start moving them towards the center. So that can build their confidence, that can show them what it is that they've already learned, and they can start to see those transferable skills into others. For the student that might get something right away and their chart looks like one of the ones at the bottom here where they have a lot of their skills in the middle, this is an opportunity for us to be able to challenge them with additional skills that they will need moving forward, or something that they might be additionally interested in to push them to continue to learn as we go through. So I think it's really neat to be able to do something like this because it really does individualize what is happening with the students' learning as we go throughout the year within all of their courses.
And this might look a little overwhelming at first, because one of the things I mentioned earlier was that there were a lot of skills and standards and stuff in middle school. But one of the things that works really well is that this is just social studies, but I would say probably close to half of those skills also work for language arts and science, such as, let's say they're in social studies, there is a skill that says I can analyze information and then synthesize new meaning out of it. That also exists in English, that also exists in science. So instead of having, say, 50 for each content area, there might be 50 total where some of those ideas transfer between subjects. So maybe a student really loves science and we can see them synthesizing information in science, and then we can just say, hey, look, you can also do this in language arts. This is how you might do it. Can you show me that you're doing this as well in language arts? And so I think that that it looks a little overwhelming when we think about having 4 of these, but 4 of them are going to equal about 1.5 of what we have here for the entire breadth of their middle school career. And the expectation isn't that they move all of these every single year. It's that by the time they go to high school, they have everything toward the middle 2 circles. So I think that that's a benefit of this as well.
So as far as student evaluation is concerned, traditionally, Eli mentioned this a few minutes ago, traditionally, the evaluative piece is so disconnected. A student's going to work on an assignment on their own. I'm going to look at their work on my own. Then you're going to look at their grade and you may go back and have a conversation with them, but it's very disconnected. The benefit, or one of them, of this process is now, instead of all these disconnected pieces, we're talking about ongoing conversations between students and teachers. It's easier for us to identify their strengths and the areas they need to work on still. Last year, we moved to student-led conferences here at Burris. They went very well, at least in my experience they did. We intend to continue these, but with the ZPD being a big foundation for that. So good place to start talking about these. you at home as parents can have some great conversations with your students where you're asking them, you know, what's going on with this skill that hasn't moved? Like, is there a way we can look at that further? Or tell me about this skill that you moved to the love corner. What do you like about that? Those types of questions would be awesome if you would address those at home.
And the last thing is that one of the things that's really important to us in this impact experience is that we provide a greater level of equity in our classrooms. And one of the things that there's a lot of research out there about right now is how can we make grading more equitable? And a few of the things that I've read have talked about standards and skills-based grading, providing more equity in that sort of evaluation piece, because a student can either not do or can do a skill. And it takes out the sort of human subjective element with the teacher, like whether, and I know none of us want to admit this, but sometimes our own biases get in the way of how we grade. And this makes it a little more egalitarian, where we're not relying on our biases to kind of guide and sort of shape how we're thinking about our students.
So in addition to the enhancements that we've made to the morning classes, we have kept the music options, and we've also expanded our language and art options for students. We've been able to add computer science to both 6th and 7th grade. We've been able to add a speech communications course to 7th grade, and we've created many more opportunities for middle school students to earn high school credits.
One of those opportunities falls under the math category. And so when it comes to our acceleration of middle school students into high school credit courses, we wanted to make sure that that was still an option within the math department. Number one, because we already have some kids that are going to be moving up to algebra next year, or they might be past that depending on what they've taken this past year. So for next year, there's not going to be any changes to what we currently do in terms of if they've qualified for algebra, they're going into algebra. If they've qualified for higher than that, that's where they're moving. Something that we would like to move on to would be providing an additional opportunity for students past next year. And so the math department in the middle school came up with this kind of progression. So what we envision is that students will take 2 full years of middle school math. So it's labeled as part 1 and part 2. It's not, you have to take part 1 first and part 2 second. It's just the skills are intermixed within those parts. And within that, like we've talked about, we'll individualize. So if there's a student that's not quite getting something that we had taught previously, we come back around. It's all very cyclical. Then we want to offer an option for students to continue on into their high school courses. So we would like to offer a block option of an Algebra 1 and a geometry course, where Algebra 1 would be taught to those middle school students who would qualify in the first semester. So again, next year, this piece is not something we're looking at for next year. Next year, it will be a full year course of algebra. But for the years past that, we would like to offer algebra just in that first semester, so that the second semester students can then take geometry and provide them with an extra opportunity later in their high school career to be able to either take another math course if they're interested, or any other kind of course that they're interested in taking that they wouldn't have otherwise had the opportunity in their schedule to complete. For the students that don't qualify for algebra, don't feel ready for algebra by their 3rd year of middle school, we're going to offer the Middle School Math Advanced course. So these would be 8th grade aged students, but it's not an 8th grade specific course. It's just working through those, taking their ZPDs from the previous years and finding what those skills are that they haven't quite moved into the Center 2 circles, or those that we can encourage them with to move to be able to do on their own. So we would be able to work with them and see what those individual pieces are, help build the confidence with them so that by the time that they complete this last year of middle school math, they are ready for algebra the following year. And what we would like to do with that second semester is actually provide them with kind of a preview to Algebra 1 so that they can move into the full course with confidence in knowing what the skills are that they're going to need as they move on. This offering this Algebra 1 kind of preview in second semester also provides us with an opportunity for any students that follow the other track of the Algebra 1 geometry. If they complete Algebra 1 in first semester and they're not confident, or we're not confident and you're not confident, we need to kind of figure out what's going on. We can shift those students over to have that algebra just kind of rehashed for them that second semester. This doesn't hold them back because normally they would be taking algebra, or previously. They'd be taking algebra for a full year, so that would count as their full year. They'd move into geometry the next fall, and they would be on track just as they are now. But it gives them that opportunity to really solidify those skills that we learn in Algebra 1 that are necessary as we move forward.
So you might be asking yourself, what is this going to look like? So our first project, we've already pretty much designed. It's called Long Walk to Water. And essentially the students are all going to read that book, Long Walk to Water, as a common reader. That way we can have a common project as the beginning for this. So everybody is sort of doing the same thing at the same time to learn how to do an actual project. Many students have done projects in elementary school, but we want to like up the ante and be like, this is what it looks like at middle school. The students are going to be sort of segregated out. So sixth grade is all going to be together. So if you have an incoming sixth grader, no worries. They're all going to be with sixth graders to start with. Seventh grade is going to be with seventh grade. Eighth grade is going to be with eighth grade. And then the students will work with their core pod. So there'll be a sixth grade pod, seventh grade pod, eighth grade pod. What's great about that is then that each grade level sort of builds a relationship with 4 teachers that they have for the whole rest of the year, kind of at their disposal. Our goal is to like be all encompassing teachers for the middle schoolers. So they've got as many people as possible to like figure out how to work with and really feel, you know, academically close with. So that way we kind of have that like nice tight knit community. The second project, the sixth grade is still going to work as the sixth grade. Then the seventh and eighth grade are going to mix depending on what their interest is for the projects that are offered. It's going to be a research focused project based on Long Walk to Water. It's going to be how to research, how to incorporate quotes, citations, citation styles, all those necessary things that you have to have for pretty much any project that you're ever going to do in the rest of your academic career. So those basic, like how to use the databases, how to make an argument and support it, all that kind of stuff is going to happen during that second project. Then the third project, through the penultimate project, all the grade levels are going to mix based on what their interest is. So if one pod offers a couple of projects that the students are interested in, they're going to be able to put their name in to try to be in those. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to have students write their top 3 projects, and then we're going to sort the students so that all of the students are getting one of their top 3 every time. We're going to use different grade levels to pick first and stuff like that. We already have a plan for that. But it's going to be based on student interest with the open mind that some students may go further in a project. So for example, there's one project that has to do with groundwater and surface water. And let's say a student got really deeply involved and they really wanted to learn more about those 2 things, they can go deeper. So we're kind of having an open end with some of the ideas. So that way students can, you know, go as deep as they want to into a topic. And last but not least, the final project, 8th grade is going to come back together as a class. So they'll be by themselves as kind of like an end of middle school shandazzle. That's my word. I enjoy that word. So 8th grade, end of middle school shandazzle, and they're going to be working all together to do an impact project before they go to high school. Ideally, we've talked about how this project will be something that actually impacts our community, depending upon what those students see as a problem in the community or something that they want to contribute to the community. That will be like their stamp on Muncie, Indiana as 8th graders before going to Burris High School. So I think Jenny's going to introduce the first project.
So the first project, as Corby mentioned, we're going to use this book, A Long Walk to Water. It's actually a very good book. It parallels 2 different stories. One of a young man growing up in Sudan in 1985 when there was a war going on and just the walk that he had to take. The other story is a young girl growing up in Sudan also, but years later, so around 2008. And it parallels their 2 stories. The young girl doesn't get to go to school because she has to retrieve water for her family. The young boy starts out going to school but doesn't get to continue in school because of the war. But I'm not going to give away the whole book. Anyway, we're going to start off reading this book together. We're going to spend about 5 weeks on this first project is the plan. So in the very beginning, like the first day, we'll introduce the unit through team activities. We're working on a scavenger hunt for the kids that will include carrying some water. so that they can relate to what they're eventually going to read about in this book, but other things. Throughout the scavenger hunt, they're going to get some information about areas with water crises and that sort of thing. We'll then research, just a brief research, about 10 locations that have been deemed to have some of the worst water crises currently going on. We'll also introduce in that first day what we call the Wonder Wall. The Wonder Wall is where we collect things that we wonder about, questions that we have that maybe we can't answer today, things that we want to think about more. Maybe we just put it up there because it's a question we have, but we're able to dismiss it, but somebody else is really going to wonder about that. So that's what the Wonder Wall is. This would pretty much complete our first day. The second day, we are going to ask students to complete a water footprint tracker. In other words, how much water do you use in a day? So we'll have them begin tracking that water when you brush your teeth, when you wash dishes, shower, all those things, just completing how much water you use in a day. Then we'll begin reading the book and we'll go through those first 2 chapters together. And we're going to create a visual representation of the 2 parallel stories, just seeing what similarities and what differences there are between the 2 kids growing up in Sudan. Then we would ask students to do a journal entry, maybe write some predictions, some self-questioning, maybe a similar experience. Maybe it's a question about what experience have you had in your life that might be similar to something we read in the book. Finally, we'd also incorporate on day 2 a math moment. A math moment will be a time about 30 minutes where the math teachers in each pod will be pulling students out and doing some direct instruction of math skills. Those math skills work into the different projects, but they require a little more direct instruction. So that math moment is where that will happen. On day 3, we're going to go ahead and collect that water footprint data and begin a competition where the students have to, first of all, calculate how much water their entire pod would use in a day. And then their goal is to come up with a way to transport that amount of water a certain distance. So they're going to be considering if they had to move that water every day, what would be the best way to do it, and come up with that method. We'll read a couple more chapters in the book and update our parallel stories, maybe add a vocabulary list. And finally, we'll look at a water crisis a little closer to home here, and that is the Flint water crisis, by viewing a documentary about that. In day 4, we're going to continue working on that transportation of the water competition, look at the next couple chapters of the book, and then have what we call a science takeover, where our science teachers in our pods are going to do some instruction and some activity about the difference between groundwater and surface water. Finally, there would be another math moment in that morning. So that's just kind of a snippet of what your students' day is going to look like, or their morning, I should say, is going to look like come August.
All right, so one of the things that is a concern, I know, for us as teachers is how are we going to get our content area in this? Because we're combining them all together, and how are we going to get like important things like analyzing sources or things like that into the curriculum? Well, we're going to do what we're calling takeovers, and essentially, as Jenny said, the science takeover is going to talk about like groundwater and surface water, possibly testing the tastes of different waters. What are the contaminants that we find in different types of water? An example of an English takeover would be talking about analyzing sources. That could also be a social studies takeover. Understanding different points of view, constructing meaningful research questions. Social studies, maybe talking about artifact analysis, things like that. The student-driven portion then, so that's very like teacher-centered and very like direct instruction takeovers are. But there's also this huge student-driven portion. So each student is going to have to do a project proposal. They're going to make their own timeline and goals. They're going to like find their resources, all those things that you would do when you create a project proposal. They are going to be responsible for doing. They're going to be formulating their own inquiry questions. Like, how do you make an inquiry question when you don't know very much about a topic? That's something we all do every day. Like, I don't know much about this. What kind of questions might I have? And they're also going to be able to experiment in creation and critical thinking and all sorts of super cool stuff where we're sort of going to take the backseat as teachers and help support them as they make these inquiries and as they discover new knowledge. So we're pretty excited about that part. All right, so this leads us to what the end of a project looks like. And one of the skills that we really want our middle schoolers to have pretty much nailed down by the time they leave middle school is their ability to present. Now, I do know there are students who when I say present, like they just about die inside. I see it in their eyes every single time I ask them to present. I promise that we are not going to force a student who is super nervous to just like hop up there and do it. Like that isn't a thing we're going to do. So there's going to be a lot of scaffolding, a lot of practice, a lot of support, all that kind of stuff for students. Because I know some of you have students who are maybe like, my student is never going to do that. We'll get them there and it'll be a nice progression and they won't feel weird or nervous about it, I promise. So what we're going to do in order to facilitate this is pod leaders are going to schedule appointments with all of the student groups so that they can sort of talk about their project in a non-threatening environment before they have to present. So they're going to be talking with their teacher and that's already presenting, but we don't call it that. So most kids aren't nervous about that. And then they're going to do small group practices within their pods. So their pod members that they've been working with the whole time can give them feedback, ask them, hey, did you ever think about this? I have a question about this thing you said. So that way they can like make these super professional and amazing and, awesome middle school presentations, awesome Burris middle school presentations, I should say, because not all middle school presentations are awesome. Anyway, so they're then going to take their feedback back. They're going to adjust their presentations. They're going to add, they're going to eliminate. And then maybe they're even going to add a couple of questions like, what would you do if you were going to study this next? And then the last thing we're going to do, hopefully for each project, especially the longer, more involved ones, is we want to present to our peers. We want to present to our parents, and we even want to invite community members in to sort of take a look at our projects that we've been doing. And we're going to do this exhibition style, hopefully over in Ball Gym, where each group is going to have their own, it's kind of almost like a science fair, only we want this to be not feel judged like a science fair, just to feel like we're sharing knowledge as a community. And so the parents will have the opportunity to see as many of those as they want to, or even just pop in and see your own kids if that's what you have time for. However that works, it's going to be pretty flexible. But we do think that that presentation thing is important because no matter what job you have, even if you're a plumber and you go to somebody's house and they have a problem with their plumbing, you have to present all the options that you're going to give to them about how to fix that problem. So presentation is like a key part of life. So that's going to be really important in this as well.
So to just kind of make sure we come back around and figure out where we've landed with this, we're looking at moving away from our traditional classes, hour-long pieces of each content, just so that students can begin to see those connections and start to use skills from what they've learned in one class in another area, so that they can see that it's not just specific to that one class. We're going to de-emphasize grades and instead re-emphasize that learning piece for the students, so that we're looking at our skill-driven lessons and our skill-driven pieces there with our ZPD, making sure that we're focused on each student as an individual as they progress through their learning. We're going to provide some experience-based learning opportunities for students to go through so that they can get a hands-on moment with their learning. And then we're going to minimize that direct instruction piece and we've got our takeovers for each content. We've got our math moments, things like that. That will still be there. But we want to create an opportunity to be facilitators for students so that they can kind of take responsibility for what it is that they're learning and what they're interested in as they move forward.
So as I said at the outset, we are so excited to be able to offer this opportunity to our students, but we do understand that it's a big shift from what we've done in the past. So we welcome your thoughts and feedback and ideas and input as we continue to grow this program. We really do feel like it's going to be a full community program. It's going to grow with student ideas, parent ideas. So what you can do to help us, give us your feedback. ask questions, and just be a problem solver on our team.
And last but not least, here is some of the supporting research. It is by no means all of it. This is not an exhaustive list. I am more than happy to talk with anyone who wants to talk about research, because that's kind of my jam. I get really excited about it. And I would love to hear anything that you all have research-based that you want to like shoot my direction. But this is kind of some of the stuff that we've based this on. A lot of stuff about like the benefits of project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, standards-based, skills-based grading, that sort of thing. So those are just a few of the articles. And like I said, if you do have any questions or you want to share something with me, I am totally open to that. So there you go.
So that brings us to the end of the presentation portion that we had planned. But we are happy and we welcome your thoughts and your comments. And if you have questions, we're happy to address those as well. If you're more comfortable using the chat, that's fine too. We can read the chat and address the question in that way.
I had one comment to make. With students taking algebra and geometry in the middle school, they're still required to have 6 credits of math while enrolled as a high school student. So that would be your Algebra 2, freshman year, sophomore year, maybe pre-calc trig, and then that third year, the AP Statistics or AP Calculus AB. So just wanted parents to be aware of that, because 6 credits must still be taken while in high school.
Thanks for clarifying that, Rachel. Everyone, if you don't know, this is Rachel Anderson. She's our high school secondary counselor. And that's one of the things that we're really excited about this, because so many of our students love to take those upper level math classes. And by getting through geometry potentially in their middle school, they will have so many more opportunities. And Ms. Anderson just shared those classes. We had a question in the chat. Will you be drawing on parent expertise? Absolutely, yes, please. Any parents who have any knowledge about anything in the world, absolutely. We would love for you to come in and work with our students, present, lead a project. We cannot say yes to that question enough.
I have a question about the social emotional learning portion. I know you mentioned that is going to be an emphasis, and with this last year and just knowing middle school needs being so great with social emotional learning, sorry, I'm the psychologist, so I'm just like wholly focused in that area. So how are we going to address the needs of social emotional learning?
We've been working, teachers and administration and counselors have been working together to kind of incorporate and embed the social and emotional learning standards into the curriculum. We don't have all the details of that worked out yet, but that's just one of the things that we are most concerned about. One way we know we're going to tackle it is through kind of the team building activities, just taking those moments to recognize that it's just not all about what I'm learning in this book or this, assignment I'm completing. It's so much more important than that. I don't know if somebody else wanted to add something to that. I'm guessing that's a no.
Abby.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add that the mentor program that we had last year will be continuing, and I know that there were varying levels of success with that, but we're hoping to have more success with that and just continue to build those strong relationships through mentoring our students.
Thank you. And I love all of the ideas. I think it's clear that the team has come together and this is well thought out, and that means that this team is going to be great for all of our students. So I appreciate all of the work that y'all have put in.
I think also thank you so much, Beth. I think also one of the areas that we're going to be able to kind of hit that social and emotional more intentionally than we have in the past is just through the evaluation process. So we have teachers that are just individually working with kids and talking about their skills and their interests and their areas for growth. And just knowing that you have, that teacher that knows you so well and is willing to work with you in those areas, we're just going to be able to have such a really valuable connection with each student individually.
I wanted to add that just some of my preliminary conversations I've had with Corby and also with Dr. Comer regarding how to embed SEL into the curriculum. Just even the first book, A Long Walk to Water, we did that book a few years ago in 7th grade team. It was a really powerful book, but there's some SEL type of things, like what the students were experiencing, you know, what was it different for the girl as opposed to the young man in the story. So there's a lot of different ways that you can embed things. So we'll do some collaboration as well. And we'll kind of sit down and kind of flesh things out here over the summer. So, and collaborate. So.
One of the questions in the chat was, will we be able to enter the building? Dr. Mara is working on that. All signs point to yes, especially for opportunities like this where you're working with students, collaborating with teachers. A parent asked, how will the pods be created? Jenny, did you want to talk about that?
Were you asking how will the pods be created as far as teachers or as far as students? I just wanted to clarify that.
Actually, both.
Okay, the teacher pods were created based on its kind of schedule because some of us still teach high school courses, and so we had to work around those. But each pod has one of each of the 4 contents. So there's a math, social studies, science, and language arts teacher in each pod. As far as the student arrangement, that will start based on grade level. So there'll be one pod will incorporate all the 6th graders, one will all the 7th, and one all the 8th. After we get through that first project, the pods are going to offer different projects, so it won't all be the same thing all year. Students will be placed based on their interests, so we'll ask them for their top 3 choices, and then they'll be placed based on those, trying to get everybody in, you know, it's as high of their interest as we can, as possible.
Just a follow-up question. This sounds great to me. My child is one of the children in that 50% that loved middle school. It was her best year ever. She couldn't imagine anything being better. I think this definitely has the opportunity to be better. She's like, oh, why are we changing something that I've loved so much? But already, I like the idea of the building the mentorship with the teachers. Miss Wood sent a note, and my child has a name that you've given her that like touched her heart. She was like, as soon as I saw the top of the envelope, it said, talk rah rah, I know who this is. And she was just beyond thrilled to have this little note card from you. And so those kind of things will go a long way in these children's openness to learning, making those connections, having more than that 55 minutes. I think this has amazing potential. Thank you, guys.
We received a question in the chat. How can we increase the opportunities for students to engage with diverse faculty members, perhaps guest lecturers of color? And then there was also the question, any new teachers of color? Thank you so much for asking these questions. As a school and as a faculty, one of our primary goals for next year is to look at how we can make ourselves a more culturally responsive environment. We're talking about a lot of things. Ms. Anderson, one of her goals is to create some student group opportunities. And I think that in approaching this, in revamping the middle school curriculum in the way that we have, we sort of create the opportunity for these types of things to happen with the guest lecturers. This is definitely a growth area for our school. But we do have a team of teachers. We have a diversity committee in the school and a team of teachers who are extremely interested and motivated to make this powerful change in our building. I don't know if anyone else wants to kind of speak to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that one of the goals that we have is to involve community partners. And I know we're specifically looking to involve community partners of all different types, ethnicities, men, women, young, old, like all of those things. We kind of want to involve as many people as we can. So for example, maybe as we're looking at the water purity of the White River, we can talk with a conservation officer, and hopefully we'll be able to garner some diversity in that. And I think Jenny also had something that she wanted to say. I saw her on mute just a second ago.
Or not.
She just wanted to unmute. I don't know. She's just playing with the space bar. It's fine.
So I have a question. So what happens to the students who doesn't prosper with this experiment? Do you guys have a plan? Because, this may not fit everyone. And, what happens if this just doesn't work for them? What's the plan for those students?
Thank you, Victor, for that question. The reality is we have a number of students who are not prospering and growing in our previous approach. And this approach allows us to individualize for the students. So we will just be able to continue to work with that student individually. We would have the flexibility to, they have 12 teachers at their disposal. So they could maybe work with a different teacher who could get them interested in something different. One of the things that I've always kind of found interesting is that we are such a small school, but sometimes we operate as if we're bigger than we are. And because we're so small, we have the ability to individually address students' needs. And so I know that I'm not answering concretely, but that's just because we haven't actually seen it yet. But our plan is to continue to work with each student individually until we can get that student to grow. So kind of meet them where they're at and kind of help them grow forward. I think that Ms. Anderson wants to add something to that.
I just wanted to say that right now, just the way the world is going and collaboration and working in teams and small groups kind of is the way of the world. Dr. Michelle Lewacki, she's my instructor. I'm working with a doctor, and we're doing all online learning, group learning. And I've never seen the student step one time in a Zoom. So that's kind of the way of education and collaboration. So my team, learning these skills now in middle school is going to be invaluable for them as they continue in education, higher education. And so I think it's a good skill set again, but the support of the team of teachers that is there. And then we also have maybe resource teachers. I'm not sure of the plan. I don't want to speak for special ed department that will push in and service students. So there is even maybe some overlap for students who are maybe not grasping the concepts. So I just wanted to put that out there, but group collaboration and working together, that's kind of the way of education and the progression as I've been experiencing myself personally.
Yeah, and we're kind of seeing this as a all hands on board kind of approach. So we have, all the middle school teachers available to every middle school student. We also will have the music teachers. We have our counselors. We have our special education department. So everybody is kind of coming together to help students find what they need to grow and to learn and to thrive.
So, Dr. Comber, to build off of that, this was a question actually posed in the feedback session I had at the end of the school year with students who sort of went through that ZPD process. And one of the major concerns for some students, really about their friends, it wasn't even necessarily the students that this applied to, but students who thrive with more structure as compared to what we've described. And, I sat down with a small group, the friends and the student, and they were like, yeah, that's a concern I have for next year. And when I explained that we will be able to individualize this and meet that student with what they need with that structure and build beyond that structure, the student's demeanor changed. There was a smile on that student's face. And when they were reassured that it's not just going to be a free-for-all and that it will be personalized to them based on their needs, and they wouldn't be forgotten with this new structure, everything was fine. So really that individual piece is going to be huge in making sure that not just the students who are super into this project, but also the students who are reluctant to jump into this project. So in my experience, we somewhat addressed that already. We just have to be willing as teachers and facilitators to do that.
one last comment from me. Sorry, guys. Is my intention to be like visible there during the learning experience. So I'm going to set up some type of schedule where I'm rotating. And so I'm there with the students more. And so that way they see me and get to build relationships with me. And that kind of helps the kind of diversity piece as well. We want to just throw that in there. But so that's kind of my goal, as I've had some discussions with like Corby, we met. So that's kind of my goal, to be with the students. So I'm building relationships with them and also seeing if anyone is maybe struggling. So from a counseling, scheduling kind of standpoint, just being aware of those things and assisting where I can.
I'm just scrolling through the chat to make sure we didn't miss any questions. Let's see here.
Well, since nobody else has asked something, another question I have is about the standards. The state has standards for the different grade levels, including that just passed this year in the state legislature, that there's going to have to be a civics course taught that every 8th graders have to complete. How are you going to incorporate those standards into this model?
Did somebody want to talk about that with like the ZPD connection? We have our teachers are going to meet together and kind of look at the standards for each content area and look at them as for the breadth of middle school and see those areas of overlap, and then teach them in collaboration rather than in isolation. And that's another kind of benefit to doing this at middle school, is that we have sort of the flexibility because it's not, middle school classes are not credit bearing, and they're more to facilitate opportunities for students to learn. We've talked a lot as a faculty, and we feel like what we care about most from middle school is that students leave being lovers of math, or lovers of science, or lovers of social studies, lovers of English. And we have seen all too frequently that students will get to maybe their 9th grade year and they'll say something like, well, I don't really like English, I'm really bad at it. We don't want students to get to high school and not love a subject, think that they're bad at it. We want it to be an opportunity for them to kind of see themselves as learners of everything, and just kind of consumers of the world and of information. We want them to experiment. We want them to engage with their peers. Did you guys want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've kind of paid really close attention to as we're making these ZPD charts is that we are in fact basing the skills on the standards. And so we're not just throwing the standards out the window, we're actually taking them and reappropriating them into cross-curricular standards. So for example, in language arts, students essentially have the exact same standards. They're reworded a little bit, and they maybe add a little bit all the way from 6th grade through 8th grade. And it's kind of preposterous that, to me, in middle school, teachers try to teach everything in 6th grade, everything in 7th grade, everything in 8th grade, when really it's the same thing, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And so if we could focus in a little bit more on, say, writing an argumentative essay over 3 years, we've hit all the standards for all 3 of those, but we didn't do it in 6th grade really intensely, 7th grade really intensely, 8th grade really intensely. We've kind of broadened that out so they have 3 years of good experience with that. And to latch onto their project, if they do, let's just use the water example. Let's say we go to the wastewater treatment plant and the water that's coming out of there isn't clean. If they're going to write an argumentative essay about why Muncie needs to clean up their water, they're going to be much more invested in it than me going, okay, you guys over here are going to do this topic, you guys are going to do this topic, now argue about it. Like, I feel like if we can embed it in real world while still retaining those standards, that's going to be beneficial. As far as the civics course, I think it was my understanding that it actually isn't a requirement for another couple of years. But hopefully what we're going to do is we're going to embed a lot of those civics concepts throughout this anyway, because our hope and our idea is that by the time the kids are part of that 8th grade project, that's going to be civics based. It's going to be community based. It's going to be like speaking to all of those things as far as government, city government, and thinking about all of the like civic discourse and all that kind of stuff. I haven't seen the standards for that course, but I think what we're going to do could really easily be wrapped in with it as well. And that's just my perspective. We actually haven't even talked about that as a group with the civics course. But that's kind of how my brain works. When I hear a new thing, I'm like, ooh, how can I make that part of my English class too? So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts about that.
I wanted to piggyback on what Corby just said regarding civics. I don't want to speak for Mr. Jones. That's his discipline. I'm not a social studies teacher or licensed in that area. However, stories take place in certain settings. So the Long Walk to Water, the political structure of that country based on, compare and contrast, which is a skill you teach in English and social studies and even science. So, there are ways to compare the political climate of that country with our country and what, different things compare with the Flint, Michigan. So there's a lot of different ways to, do comparison and bring in those standards. I used to be a classroom teacher before I was a school counselor, and I'm taught, so I just want people to know I'm not just like pulling things out the air, but I have been I've been a K through 12 classroom teacher, so, just want to throw that out there.
So, and sort of to build off of both of you there, and some of the questions that we've discussed already, we can stand up all day and talk about civics concepts, but this experience is going to allow the students to live these concepts. We can make a phone call and potentially have Mayor Ridenour meet with our students. We can go see what he does every day. We can go out into the community and actually engage in civics rather than just talking about it. So I haven't looked at the actual requirements for the civics class. I just know that they had passed the law. But I think living those standards is going to be so much more impactful for our kids and our community than just talking about them.
Does anyone have any final questions or comments to share? I appreciate all the comments in the chat. I think that we've all kind of been reading those, and we really appreciate your feedback. I think that I see a lot of, I know that just in our parent community, we have a lot of faculty and employees at Ball State. We are so excited about the opportunities that this is going to open up to help us use Ball State as a resource. I don't think that we have done that as much as we could have. I think that we have a tremendous wealth of opportunity and knowledge sitting on our very campus, and so we are excited for that piece of this as well. So we are presenting again this evening at 4 o'clock. I don't know if you want to come twice, but maybe you do. And then we will make the presentation available. We've recorded it, so we'll make it available to families who didn't have an opportunity to attend, or maybe anybody that just kind of wants a refresher. So I'll go ahead and send information out about how to be connected with that copy. Again, we thank everyone so much for coming. We are very excited about this. I do want to reiterate, while it seems like we, are really locked in on that first project, which is true, we are, we have an entire year, and we want to get feedback from the community, ideas from the community, and really ideas from the students. And we don't have, we want their feedback and their ideas and their interests and their thoughts as we kind of move forward. So we really do mean it when we say that we would like your feedback and ideas to help this program grow. We are very excited about it, and we are especially excited about the fact that we're kind of living up to our mission as a laboratory school, and that is kind of to try new things, to not do the traditional education, and we're happy that we have this opportunity to do that. So I'm just going to give another second for any last minute questions. All right, thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate your time.